I hope you're having a great Martin Luther King Day. Dr. King's dedication and work for peace still shine in the world, inspiring and influencing everyone. In that sense, today's webinar regarding Korea peace has a strong connection. In honor of Dr. King, we are holding the webinar. The situation in Northeast Asia surrounding the Korean Peninsula is dire. As the US-ROK-Japan military alliance is strengthening, military tensions and the risk of war are escalating. In September, it was known that North Korea had legislated the use of nuclear weapons. On December 16th, the Kishida Japanese cabinet declared that Japan would possess counterattack capabilities, which means the ability to attack enemy bases. Today's webinar discusses recent developments in Northeast Asia to critically assess the region-wide arms race toward the first strike capability and the dangers of an accidental war in the region. Today, we'll hear the insights of an expert on the peace issues in the region. We have a distinguished speaker, Dr. Jae-jung Seo. Dr. Seo is professor in the Department of Politics and International Studies at International Christian University, Tokyo, Japan, and he is visiting scholar at Harvard Yenching Institute. He has published many works on U.S.-Korea relations, U.S. policy toward Asia, international relations of East Asia, and international security. This webinar will last for an hour. Dr. Seo will talk for 30 minutes. Then we'll hold a Q&A session for 20 to 25 minutes. While listening to the talk, please write your questions in the chat. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Seo.
Well, thank you. And looks like my camera is acting up just when I'm starting. Okay, it's better now. Well, thank you for that introduction. And it's a great honor for me to have this opportunity to talk on Martin Luther King Day, especially on the topic of peace. And it's humbling for me to speak in front of this group who has been working for a long time for peace and justice, not only in the US, but also in the world. As Kumju said in her introductory remark, the region of Northeast Asia is entering what I consider is the most dangerous phase in my lifetime. I've watched and worked on security situations of Northeast Asia since the 1980s, at least. And I've never seen such a bad, I've never seen anything worse than it is now. So I'm gravely concerned about the recent developments and the situation today and the likely events this year. So today I would like to share my concerns, and I hope that I get some positive feedbacks and insight for how we might be able to help the peoples in the region move out of the current situation. Let me share my screen and go on with my presentation. So my basic argument is, I'm going to have to turn off my camera. It's acting up again. All right.
Quite a few people have had problems with their camera since Zoom made an upgrade about 2 weeks ago. It might be.
Oh, I see.
Could be some kind of software problem, but.
Yeah. Well, you don't have to see my face while I'm giving a presentation, so it's better that you focus on the PowerPoints that I hope you can see. And my basic argument today is that the region of Northeast Asia might be following the footsteps of European countries at the beginning of World War I. Just before World War I, major European countries were pursuing first strike doctrines and capabilities to strike first before others strike. And so the situation was very tense, and so tense that the situation was described by many scholars, the tinderbox of Europe. And when an accident happened in the form of the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, that accident ignited the tinderbox and ultimately included all the European powers into a major conflict that we now know is World War I. And the situation in Northeast Asia is similar in that major powers, most of the major powers in the region are pursuing a first strike capability. And they are sitting on a situation where a lot of accidents and mistakes could happen. And so any of these accidents or mistakes could ignite the tinderbox of Northeast Asia anytime. So just briefly, I'll go over World War I, mainly focusing on the first strike capability and accident before I turn to the present situation in Northeast Asia. So I guess this group does not remind a history lesson, but major powers, including Russia, Germany, France, UK, were all pursuing what scholars call the cult of the offensive, that they believe that they need to strike first before they could hit, because the first mover would have an advantage over other countries. And so Germany's Schlieffen Plan is the best known offensive doctrine, where Germany would mobilize at the first sign of Russian or French mobilization, and then Germany will hit France before France would be fully ready. And after a decisive victory, Germany will now turn east and hit Russia before Russia would be fully mobilized. And so going first was critical to Germany's war plan. But other major powers had similar plans to go first, mobilize fast, and strike first. And then these countries were also locked in alliances. And so Italy, Austria, Hungary, Germany formed an alliance. Russia, France, and Britain also formed a countervailing alliance. And so if one country in one side starts to mobilize, then the countries on the other side were pressured to reciprocate. So this was a situation just before the Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated, and the assassination itself was a plan by Serbian nationalist group, but the assassination itself was the result of a series of really incredible accidents. But whatever happened, Ferdinand was assassinated, and that triggered Austria-Hungary to start to move, because Austria-Hungary was worried that Serbia might pursue independence. But as soon as Austria-Hungary started to mobilize, that triggered Russia to mobilize too, because Russia had a plan to start mobilization as soon as Austria-Hungary starts. But seeing Russia mobilize, Germany felt the pressure to mobilize and strike France before Russia would be ready, before France could be ready. And so Germany studied its war plan, Schlieffen Plan, and started France. And France responded by counterattacking, and Germany also expanded war by attacking Russia. And then eventually Britain was brought in, and the conflict became a world war that involved all the major European countries. And so this cartoon sort of shows how the chain reaction resulted in a war that involved all the major wars. So it started with Serbia, but then Austria, Russia, Germany, France, and ultimately UK. But this kind of situation, chain reaction, was triggered because all the countries were preparing for a first strike. And then an accident really triggered the chain reaction. And my main point today is that the situation in Northeast Asia is similar in that North Korea, South Korea, the US, and Japan are all pursuing a first strike capability. And North Korea made it even public that they adopted a first strike doctrine. And so the countries are really following the footsteps of the European countries of the early 20th century. So let's first take a quick look at what North Korea did last year. Going back to 2013, North Korea had a law on a nuclear state. And the law was explicit about the purpose of nuclear weapons, which were seen as a deterrence weapon. And so the law adopted in 2013 explicitly stated that North Korea would not use its nuclear weapons for a first strike. But then that dramatically changed last year when the Supreme People's Assembly adopted the new law on nuclear weapons policy in September. And missions are similar to the missions of American nuclear weapons, but the conditions under which nuclear weapons could be used are alarming. The first condition is nuclear weapons or weapons of mass destruction attack has begun. So if this is the only condition, then the nuclear weapons, North Korean nuclear weapons would be used as a counterattack and second strike. So this would be a deterrence purpose. But then they made a point of adding the nuclear weapons or WMD attack is deemed imminent. So in other words, even if they are not attacked, they may decide that an attack is imminent. Then they can use their nuclear weapons. So this would be a clear first strike doctrine. But they did not stop there. They went on and listed number of other conditions under which they could use nuclear weapons. And as you could see, that they have a clear law that they would use nuclear weapons even if they are not attacked with nuclear weapons. And they are now saying that they could use nuclear weapons if a war is prolonged, or if a fatal military attack is launched against important strategic objectives. And of course, if a non-nuclear attack is launched against national leadership, North Korea will retaliate with its nuclear weapons. So this is a very explicit first strike doctrine that the North Koreans would use nuclear weapons under these conditions where the leadership or strategic assets are threatened with non-nuclear attacks. Now, does this mean the North Korean military have the capability to pull this off? And the interesting thing about North Korean capability is that North Korean military has been pursuing a second strike capability in the face of growing South Korean and American military sophistication in missile defense and preemptive strike capabilities. And so North Korea has been developing launch systems and warheads that would avoid or evade missile defense or preemptive strikes. So they have developed a number of hidden silos and systems, and the most innovative system is this one. They developed a submarine-launched ballistic missile, but they tested the SLBM from a lake. And so now they have demonstrated the capability that they could actually hide missiles under lakes, in addition to mountains, silos, and other places. So they could practically hide their weapons anywhere in their country. And they put missiles on mobile launchers so that they could avoid preemptive strikes. And they have developed launch and warning systems capabilities. And so the older generation of rockets were liquid fuel engines, but now they have solid fuel rocket engines that could be launched without much warning time. And the latest one is the picture on the right. And so even though they already have solid fuel missiles with short and medium range, they developed a new solid fuel engine that could be used for an ICBM last year. So they have all these systems for launching a missile. And also they have developed a number of new types of warheads that could maneuver in different ways so that they could avoid missile defense systems. So, for example, they have a warhead that can fly down and then lift up and go down again. And they have a warhead that can accelerate at the last phase of flight. And so North Korean military and engineers developed this kind of missiles and warheads to avoid preemptive strikes and to evade missile defense systems. But ironically, all of these could be used for first strike capability without getting caught. And on the last day of 2022, Kim Jong-un made an order to start mass production of tactical nuclear weapons and exponential increase in nuclear warhead stockpile, so that the systems on the left could be mated with nuclear warheads. And so North Korea is definitely moving in the direction of first strike capability. And South Korea is responding by developing its own first strike capability. But I think it's important that we take a step back and look at the situation I guess I'll look at the big picture. And the big picture is that South Korea's military spending, according to State Department's publication, is $44 billion, whereas North Korea's is $4.3 billion. So in other words, South Korea is spending 10 times as much as North Korea. And South Korea has been spending more on its military since the early 1970s. And another interesting fact about this report by the State Department is that 4.3 billion, the military spending, makes up 26% of North Korean GDP. So that means 4 times as much. That is $17 billion is North Korea's GDP. Now compare that with South Korea's military spending, $44 billion. In other words, South Korea's military spending is larger than 2 times North Korea's GDP. So even if North Korea dedicates all its economic productive capacities to the military, it would not be able to match South Korea. Weapon to weapon or soldier to soldier. No one, I guess the Global Firepower Index, it's a company that makes this index. And according to Global Power Index, South Korea is number 6 in the world, and North Korea is number 34. And South Korea is also supported by the US and Japan, and South Korea is being given American extended deterrence. So you put all of these, and it's no wonder that North Korea is turning to weapons of asymmetry. They cannot match South Korea. There is no way North Korea can match South Korea in conventional capabilities. And so they are turning to weapons of asymmetry in order to recreate some kind of a semblance of a military balance. All right. And South Korea is pursuing 3-axis system that is made up of a kill chain, Korean air and missile defense, and Korean massive punishment and retaliation. So what the Korean military is now pursuing is an ability to destroy North Korean missiles and weapons before they could be used. That's what kill chain is for. KAMD is basically missile defense, and KMPR is a retaliation capability. And so South Korean military is acquiring the capability to deter with the KMPR, but then South Korea is also acquiring missile defense system that would neutralize North Korea's nuclear capabilities. And if South Korea succeeds in doing so, then means South Korea will have a first strike capability, and South Korea will give the alliance the first strike capability. And the kill chain is, I guess, officially a preemptive capability, but it has many characteristics of first strike capability. And now South Korean militaries are now looking seriously into left of launch capabilities and various ways of disabling North Korean missile systems before they could be used. On top of this, the US and Japan are also pursuing their own first strike capabilities. And the big picture is that the US and Japan are both emphasizing the maintenance of the status quo. And the status quo could be a good thing if the status quo is peace and prosperity. But as far as the Korean Peninsula is concerned, the status quo is the state of war. And so when Biden says, Biden administration wants to maintain the status quo, he is basically saying he will maintain the state of war. And that's quite clear in the ways in which Biden administration has dealt with this joint statement made in 2018. And official North Korean policy of the administration is to have a dialogue without any condition. Interpretation, dialogue without any condition that the dialogue will start with this. Deterrence started in 1950, November 30, 1950, to be specific, when President Truman made an explicit public announcement that the US would use atomic bomb in Korea. And that has continued ever since. And every statement made by US Korean leaders and the Japan US leaders always include a threat to use nuclear capabilities. And so it's a constant since 1950. What's new is a tailored deterrence. And so nuclear weapons will be used, but it'll be tailored to take out the regime. So that has the offensive element. And then on top of the defense, the US is pursuing defense in the form of a missile defense. And you all know that the missile defense will give the defender the first strike capability when it disables the opponent's ability to strike. And at the same time, South Korea, Japan, and the US are all pursuing a preemptive strike capability. And the latest addition is Kishida administration's decision to pursue what it calls counter-strike capability. And one major component of a counter-strike capability, or perhaps the major component of the counter-strike capability, is a Tomahawk cruise missiles. And eventually, the Japanese government has a plan to use an upgraded version of their own missile, but Type 2 missiles are similar to Tomahawk. And so what is Tomahawk? Well, this is what the US Navy says about Tomahawk. It's a cruise missile that can fly at a subsonic speed for a deep land attack. And it was very successful, according to the Navy, in Operation Desert Storm. And let's unpack that a little bit. This is what the Tomahawk missile looks like. And it was first used in the Gulf War in 1991. And it was used on January 17. And if you know the history, you would know that this is the first day of the war. So Tomahawk missile was the first weapon that hit Iraq before anything else. Invasion of Iraq in 23, 40 Tomahawk missiles fell on Iraq on March 19th. And if you remember the history, you would know this is the first day. So the dawn of the 19th saw Tomahawk missiles falling on Saddam Hussein's hiding place. So Tomahawk missiles have a history of being the first weapon in all of these operations, invasions. And Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, you can go on and on. So this is a very effective weapon for a first strike. Another interesting thing is technical characteristic is that it can travel up to 16,000 kilometers, but to travel 1,000 kilometers, it takes about an hour. What does that mean? Well, Kishida wants to use Tomahawk to take out North Korean missiles or Chinese missiles before they could be launched. But let's see how that would work. If Tomahawk is launched off Japanese island, the distance to Pyongyang would be about 1,000 kilometers. And so Tomahawk, if Tomahawk is launched from here, it'll take an hour to hit a target in North Korea. So if Japan wants to take out North Korean missile before it could be launched, that means Japanese military, Japanese self-defense forces would have to launch a missile 1 hour before North Koreans ignite their missiles. So you could easily imagine a number of scenarios where a launching of a Tomahawk could actually be a trigger of a North Korean counterattacks. North Koreans might see Tomahawk flying into their country and remember these histories, and they may feel that they are under attack, and they even have a law. If they deem they are under attack, then they would use a nuclear weapon to retaliate. And so if they see Tomahawk missiles flying in, they could launch their missiles, nuclear missiles, against Japan, according to their law. And if North Koreans are clever, they could actually trick Japan into firing the Tomahawk missiles into them first. You know, they could just set up mock missiles and pretend they are preparing to launch it. You know, pretend that they are fueling their missiles, and you know, they can combine with all kinds of chatters about, you know, how Japanese imperialists never apologize, and how, you know, great North Korean leader has to now teach the Japanese the lesson once and for all, and all that stuff. And you know, they could prepare their mock missiles in the middle of you know, open field, so that American satellites can pick it up, South Korean airplanes pick up, and they'll relay all those pieces of information to Japanese self-defense forces. And then the Japanese authorities may be led to believe that, you know, North Korean attack is imminent. Then they have to initiate the launch of a cruise missile 1 hour before North Korean could start. That means that doesn't give Japanese very much time. And so Japanese will launch cruise missiles, and the North Koreans would just patiently wait until their mock missile gets hit. And then they cry foul. They weren't going to attack Japan. This was just a demonstration. There was no warhead. There was really no missile. But the Japanese attacked North Korea first. And now it's time to counterattack. One of my worst case scenarios, but having Tomahawk missiles in Japanese hands doesn't help. It actually increases the risks of war. And the situation is more tense because the economic sanctions that have been, you know, imposed on North Korea since 1950 have been tightened with the involvement of navies of not only the US, but also France, UK, and Australia. And these naval forces make a point of using Japanese ports to draw Japan into this. And they also make a point of conducting freedom of navigation operations off China and other multilateral exercises. And so this can be a link to China. So at the moment, these operations are being conducted purportedly to impose economic sanctions, but all these naval forces are being mobilized from outside the region, and they are also getting involved in naval exercises aimed at China. So my basic point is that North Korea, South Korea, the US, and Japan are all pursuing first strike capabilities, and they have first strike doctrines as well. And I don't believe that they would intentionally attack the other side first. For North Korea, that would be a suicide. For South Korea, the US, and Japan, that would also be, a major disaster. And so it's not in anyone's interest to actually implement a first strike. But what I worry is the possibility of an accident. And let me just show what happened in November. Beginning of November saw the beginning of US-Korea Air Force joint exercise, Air Vigilant. And North Korea responded by launching some missiles. And one of them fell south of NLL, Northern Limitation Line, that South Korean government considers the borderline, for the first time after the armistice. And so South Korea took it really seriously that North Korea fired a missile into its territory and responded by sending attack airplanes, and they fired the missiles into North Korean Sea. And the North Koreans claim that they responded to this by launching cruise missiles all the way deep into the south, almost off Busan. And this is a point of a contention with South Korean military that argues that they did not find any cruise missiles flying in from North Korea. But North Korea claims that it fired 2 cruise missiles. But whoever is lying, I think a lie worked this time. If North Korea lied, then they could, just claim that they responded with military force to South Korean provocations, and then they could stop at that point. And it's possible that South Korean military lied about this time, because they could say that, yeah, the cruise missiles never happened, and therefore South Korea's air counterstrike was the last word, and therefore they could stop. So the escalation was stopped at this point, perhaps thanks to a lie that one side made. But what's really worrisome is the possibility that the missile that fell south of the NLL might have been an accident. North Korea claims that they fired surface-to-air missiles. They never acknowledged that they fired anything intentionally south of NLL. And what South Korean military recovered is the engine body of the missile, not the warhead. So it's at least plausible that North Koreans fired surface-to-air missiles, and this is a surface-to-air missile. And so North Korea fired the surface-to-air missiles in response to South Korean-US joint air exercise. And the warhead ended somewhere else. But then the engine, you cannot really control the engine. And so it fell south of NLL by accident. And South Korea responded to this because they thought this was intentionally done. And well, we've seen accident in Ukraine, and I'm sure you all know, so I'll skip this. And I'll skip another accident in South Korea, but quickly jump onto accidents in Japan that happened on November 3rd. And when North Korea fired an ICBM, or what looked like an ICBM, American spy satellites and reconnaissance planes picked up the signals, and they relayed them to Japanese authorities, which then sent an alarm. The Japanese have an alarm system that alerts its citizens to take a shelter if there is a missile attack. And so apparently, American military thought the North Korean missile was flying into Japan, and the red area in the map, so Niigata, Yamagata, and what is this? Anyhow, 3 provinces of Japan were seen potential targets, and so citizens in that area were alerted to take a shelter. And then, so this was at 7:53, and then what time is it? 8:39. They sent Japanese authorities sent a second alarm saying that the missile flew over Japan and headed toward the Pacific. But in fact, the missile never flew over Japan. The missile actually stopped before reaching anywhere near Japan. And it's not clear exactly what happened to the warhead, but the warhead disappeared midair. But the Japanese and by implication the US did not pick that up. And so if Japan had possessed cruise missiles back then, last year in November, the missiles would have been triggered in response to a missile, North Korean missile that never reached Japan, anywhere near Japan. And accidents like that happen. Accidents happened last year. And there were really scary moments, especially in November. And this year, South Korea, US have planned to hold a major joint exercise in March. And I have a stinky feeling that North Korea will respond to this in a very vigorous manner. And they are holding this exercise, and North Korea is likely to respond to this vigorously when all the parties are really gearing up for the first strike capability. And so if anything goes wrong during this exercise, as many things went wrong during the November exercise, it could create a really dangerous situation. And even if March doesn't see any major crisis, overall the situation is really similar to the pre-war situation in Europe. So please watch the situation carefully, and please share your insights if you have any suggestions as to how to diffuse the tension. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Seo, for your highly informative and insightful presentation. It was incredibly helpful in understanding the current situation in Northeast Asia and future prospects for peace. There are a lot of questions posted in the chat. I'll do my best to give the questions as time permits. Actually, we only have 14 minutes. So there is a question about clarifying a preemptive attack. I think you explained almost at the end of the presentation still. Could you please re-clarify preemptive attacks means by North Korea, US, or South Korea?
Well, preemptive strike in legal sense is an attack when a country feels that an enemy's attack is imminent, and there is a clear sign of an attack, and that there is no other alternative. And in that case, striking the enemy's military is called preemptive strike, and it's allowed in international law. And what I'm saying is that, for example, Japan is acquiring Tomahawk missiles as a preemptive strike capability, and what they call counter-strike capability is portrayed as a preemptive strike capability. But what I have shown is that in reality, this preemptive strike capability will be used as a first strike capability. In other words, Japan is likely or has to launch its cruise missiles way before an attack on Japan is imminent.
Okay, I'll give you more questions. Would any of the possible belligerents in a nuclear conflagration really be able to avoid being destroyed themselves?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Okay. Would any of the possible belligerents in a nuclear conflagration really be able to avoid being destroyed themselves?
Yeah, I don't know if that's really possible, because now North Korea possesses nuclear weapons, and any conflict with North Korea will now involve nuclear weapons, the use of nuclear weapons, because North Korea has this law and capabilities, and North Korea has the delivery capability to send nuclear warheads not only to South Korea but also to Japan and the U.S. continent, and so I don't think it's possible really to escape a nuclear war and the damages following from it.
Okay, there are a couple of questions regarding military funding. So is South Korea funded by the US? What is the total military funding to South Korea by the US? And UN forces is funded by US?
Well, South Korean military was initially funded by the U.S. and U.S. Military aid played a critical role in building up South Korean military in the 50s and 60s. But South Korea has one of the top 10 economies of the world, and so it can fund its own military. But the U.S. has about 30 to 36,000 soldiers in South Korea, and the expenses for keeping U.S. forces in Korea are borne by American taxpayers. And South Korea purchases a lot of weapon systems from the U.S. And these weapons purchases are allowed through FMS and other congressionally approved programs. And so the Congress has a role to play in supporting South Korean military too.
Okay. There is a question about arms dealers. Who are the major arms dealers?
Who are the major arms dealers? Well, let's see. I mean, all the major arms dealers are involved, and I guess since I explicitly mentioned Tomahawk, I would say that Tomahawk is now being produced by Raytheon, although it was originally designed by General Dynamics. And so Raytheon is a main beneficiary of Japan's new decision to acquire Tomahawk missiles. But then there is an interesting cooperation between Japan and the U.S. To develop missile defense systems like SM-2, and so Mitsubishi Heavy Industry is working with American company, again Raytheon and General Dynamics, to develop missile defense systems. And so all the major players are involved and heavily involved in this. And the latest twist to this is that South Korean defense contractors are now emerging as big exporters. So South Korea is exporting tanks and artilleries to back to Europe or the US, so that they could replenish their weapons stocks after sending them to Ukraine.
Okay. In your opinion, how might the peoples of the world effectively de-escalate tensions in the area?
Yeah, that's really a good question. And I would like to hear your opinions, given the experiences and backgrounds you have. One thing I would say is that one of the main reasons why there is such a tension is that there is a war in the Korean Peninsula, and the war has never ended. And so I think it's really critical that we remember that the status quo for Northeast Asia, for the Korean Peninsula, means the state of war. We are only in the armistice, and the war has never ended. And since the U.S., South Korea are engaged in a war with the DPRK, they continue to develop new weapon systems, and they continue to find, try to find ways to win the war. And so fundamentally, the state of war has to end. And we don't necessarily have to go back to the joint statement made by Trump if you do not like Trump. But I think the content of this statement is really, really important. And the first item in this statement is that the US and DPRK commit to establish new US-DPRK relations in accordance with the desire of the peoples of the two countries for peace and prosperity. I think that this is a really important foundation that we have to get back to.
Okay, thank you so much for your answer. And so this might be the last question, I'm afraid. So why does Biden administration not know that malignant narcissist Putin would do anything to stop NATO at Ukraine if US did not promise to keep NATO out of there, remove missiles 10 minutes from Moscow, and guarantee security of Russia from Western powers who trashed USSR in both World Wars?
Yeah, there are people who know more about Russia and Ukraine, so maybe I should not venture into that area. But I would agree that the Biden administration missed a great opportunity to create new security structure in Europe. But it's not just Biden administration, but the succession of U.S. administrations has pursued the expansion of NATO, and that has been pursued at the cost of alternative security framework that would bring in not only NATO member countries, but also Russia and others. And so I think we are paying the cost of the failure to look for an alternative, to look for an opportunity to create peace. And if we learn anything from Ukraine, we should learn that we really need to look for an alternative that would diffuse tension and that would bring in all the major stakeholders into a dialogue and engagement.
Okay, thank you. So with our limited time, I'm afraid I have to miss some of the questions. And so today's webinar is aimed at understanding the situation in Northeast Asia and contributing to the path to peace in the region. The 117th Congressional Session ended in 2022, and Congress has just started its 118th session. Our peace organizations and activists are trying to move Congress to end the Korean War and bring permanent peace. While the bills are, when the bills are introduced to Congress, I will share the information to get your support. It's time to wrap up our webinar. Thank you so much again. Thank you again, Mr. Dr. Seo, for sharing your in-depth knowledge and insights. And thank you to all the participants for joining the webinar today and for your support for Korea Peace. So bye now.
Well, there are some questions about how they can get involved, and that's great. I hope you will all get involved. Contact Mass Action and contact Kumju to get more information. And I am based in Japan, but for now I'm here in Cambridge until June. And so it'll be wonderful to meet at least some of you face to face and share our concerns. Thank you again so much.
Thank you so much for your great presentation.